Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Phil Balmat. I am a director on the San Joaquin Resource Conservation District, resident of Roberts Island, and I was here in the 97 floods also. So, I don't know how many are really familiar with the Paradise Cut proposal, but I'm going to call it a proposal because it is not a project yet, because it has not been adopted by anybody with any money. The Resource Conservation District has been trying to get this thing rolling with our partners, American Rivers, Concero Solutions, ESA Engineering, MBK Engineering. And the idea today is to try to explain this whole project and briefly, but the main idea is that once Paradise Cut is open and the larger weir comes in, we're going to have more water coming downstream. Today, we want to address the impact of the downstream people and where dredging is going to occur. We want to talk a lot about dredging. We want to talk about your individual knowledge and experience, because there's no knowledge better than local knowledge. All these people and the engineers, engineers, I know you're all here, but the people who live on the levee know the levee the best. And they can tell you what's actually happening out there. So we're going to deal with three strategies today. One is channel depth restoration. And then we want to deal with downstream flood risk reduction. And during the course of our talk today, we want to take time for everybody to ask questions. It's going to be raise your hand and ask. Some of it may be talked about later on, and if that's the case, the speaker will say, we're going to cover that in a minute. The third thing we want to talk about is habitat restoration, which is also part of this project to get it through the state of California. But the habitat restoration is to be done without increasing the risk of flooding. So you should all receive copies of the memos. They were there as we came in. As you know, the river levels are especially high right now, and I know everybody's pretty busy with that. So if you didn't receive one of the memos, feel free to get up and get one. You also have comment pages in your handouts. If you have comments that you want to leave and report, do so. There's going to be a map at the back that you can put comments on and talk to Mr. Herrick. He will be there. If some of you don't know where the bathrooms are, they're right behind me through those doors. And with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Patria Marchand, the president of Concero Solutions, who has been instrumental in getting us to this point.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. We really appreciate it. Before I begin, I want to introduce a couple key people who are in the audience today. I don't think Chris Elias is here yet. Is he here yet? No? Okay, he's with the the San Joaquin Agency, Flood Control Agency. And we also have Glenn Prasad here, who's also the Deputy Executive Director for SAJAFCA. Glenn, could you raise your hand right here? SAJAFCA, as you probably know, has agreed to be the lead agency for the Paradise Cut and South Delta Restoration Project going forward. As Phil Balmat mentioned, the San Joaquin County Resource Conservation District has been leading this project up until now. But after this meeting and a grant that we're currently wrapping up, SAJAFCA will be the lead agency for this project. And you'll be hearing more about that during the presentation today. I also wanted to introduce Steve Rother with the Department of Water Resources. Steve, could you raise your hand? Steve has been instrumental in helping to secure $3 million for the next phase of this project. And Steve, we just wanted to thank you for your continued advocacy for this important work going forward under SAJAFCA's leadership. So next, I'd like to give you all a friendly heads up that we're going to be asking for your active participation today during the meeting. And I also wanted to let you know that this meeting is being recorded. We want the San Joaquin County Resource Conservation District wants to hear your thoughts, just like Phil said in the beginning. This meeting really is about you and your feedback on the project, especially with regard to opportunities to address downstream impacts from the proposed Paradise Cut expansion. And you're going to hear an introduction to the project from John Herrick, so an overview so you understand all of the work that's been done in the last 5 years. And then you also will be given an opportunity to provide specific feedback on the 3 strategies that Phil mentioned, which are the channel depth restoration, the downstream impacts, and also some potential habitat restoration projects. But this meeting is about you and your feedback. If you are not able to get all of your questions out today, there are going to be comment cards that are included in your packet, and you can write down your questions as well. But your feedback is going to go directly to SEDACA, and so it will be used in the next phase of this process. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Herrick, General Counsel for the South Delta Water Agency and a board member for the San Joaquin County RCD.
And many other wonderful titles. But I'm sorry we had to have this meeting during this high flow time, but you know, we're trying to get this done according. Hello. Sorry we had to have this meeting during high flow times, but of course we're operating under the limitations of a grant, so we have to get things done, and I appreciate everybody showing up. Phase two refers to the second grant we got from the Delta Conservancy, and I just want you to understand the number of entities and interests that have been participating in this. And so that includes, of course, South Delta Water Agency, not to put us first, but the RCD, the local RCD, has been instrumental in getting the grants and moving forward. But we've also had everybody else involved that we could. So we've had the county, we've had the Delta Conservancy, the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, the City of Lathrop, City of Manteca, River Partners, American Rivers, Concero Solutions, MBK, KSN, ESA, the state of California, of numerous agencies. It's been really a joint effort, and I want to include with that all of the reclamation districts, because very early on we got everybody on board so we could move forward. I do want to give a little shout out to American Rivers, and it's an environmental group, and so sometimes environmental groups and us, we have differences of opinion, but from the very beginning they've been very helpful and very understanding when we started demanding other things like dredging. So I want to make sure that they're recognized. And of course we'll get to it later again, but the state of California's extreme understanding and generosity now to start funding the continued efforts. So with that, see if it works now. Paradise Cut Project. This is the original project. It started years ago when Alex Hildebrand said we should avoid things like the 2017 floods. And so he tried to get together a group of people on the east side of the San Joaquin River to agree to, okay, let's designate some overflow area that we know will flow under certain conditions, and that's better than unanticipated floods. So everybody loved and respected Alex, and all his neighbors sat down with him and said, no, thank you, Alex. We don't want a flood. So anyway, from that, the project got developed. People started coming up with good ideas. It actually got into the Central Valley Flood Control Plan years ago, and that was in large part due to American Rivers' efforts. A gentleman named John Kane, I don't think he's here today, but they kept it going. So here's the project. Where's my magic? So this is the San Joaquin River. Up is south in this, so downstream flows this way. Here's the weir for Paradise Cut. Paradise Cut is the overflow relief valve for the San Joaquin River, as originally designed by, I guess, the Corps or its predecessor. And the project anticipates having a new weir upstream, and then water would overflow in this area under certain conditions, and those conditions are when the river flow gets to a certain stage, but that's only about estimated, once every 10 years or so. So that's just a very general estimate, but it doesn't happen all the time. But anyway, that's a relief valve, so we take the peak off the flows and would put them back in the existing Paradise Cut.
Hey, John?
Yes?
Would it be flowing today?
Yes. Yes, the flow, Vernalis yesterday was 3,500 something CFS, 35,000 CFS.
5 feet, yeah.
And this would flow at, I think, 14,000, 18,000.
17, 18.
17, 18.
Quick question.
Yes.
was flowing today, would our area here be lower, or would we still be as high?
It would, well, it depends on where you are in the system, right? And I'll get to this in a minute, but at the new weir they would build, it would drop the stage under 97 event by 3 feet, about 2 feet at Mossdale, and then that gets smaller the farther you go downstream. But again, it depends on where you are and how they operate it, because you could, well, anyway, yes. Rudy?
Yeah, further downstream, does it raise the elevation at all, anywhere downstream?
Yes.
Added water?
Yes, it raises the elevation. There's another slide coming up on that. It raises the elevation down to Grant Line and parts of Old River. That's a smaller elevation raise, but yes. So anyway, I think I've complimented everybody, so let me move on. I have a script. I normally just wing things, but they gave me a script and told me to keep at it. Now, here's the downstream impacts, okay? Now, let me start by saying this was developed, this map with the numbers on it, on the original Paradise Cut project, which was prior to our inclusion of the significant dredging, okay? You understand that? So this is the base case, which is existing, is 1997 flood stage, the highest in 97. So when you go upstream, you get these are in inches, you get, significant, as I said, about 3-foot decrease in stage at the new weir. So around the new weir, a little upstream of our house, significant flood protection. You get down to Mossdale and you start getting down to 2 feet. And then the farther you go downstream, the more impacts. We're not trying to hide anything from you. Again, these are estimates of potential projects. We don't know what the specific project is. We don't know what the specific impacts are. But right now we anticipate, you could have 2 to 6 inches over here where you get to Grant Line Canal and Old River, say near Tracy Boulevard. And of course, Paradise Cut's gonna go up when we put more water into it. So Paradise Cut itself would rise. So that's the that's the old estimate based on the project as originally conceived, but that's not the project we're gonna move forward with. Because of these issues, we wanted to make sure that everybody could support something that didn't hurt them, to put it the wrong way. But so let me move. So the 3 strategy areas we're looking at today and looking at in general are how to address, the strategies we're looking at today are for addressing downstream impacts. How do we do that? And we are going to do that, or we're not going to build a project, right? We're not going to build a project that helps one part of the South Delta Water Agency's area and hurts another part. We're not going to do that. So channel restoration and expansion. I'll get to the specifics of that, but the meeting we had, it's probably been 3 years now, we had a meeting here and everybody stood up and pointed at me and said, don't give me more water. So we heard that, and everybody also said, first thing you got to do is dredge the channels of the South Delta. So again, I'll get to those specifics here in a minute, but that's one of the things we're going to do. We're going to reestablish channel capacity. That doesn't cure flood control issues completely, right? But it helps. The other thing we're going to do is address those downstream flood impacts, of course. Any project you built, you got to address adverse impacts. So here's the general idea that John Herrick come up with. If we dredge the South Delta, we're going to have a couple million cubic yards of dredge material, right? So we will work with every RD on their short and long-term plans, and they will get an unlimited supply of dirt that they can either use for tow berms, or they can trade for rock. They can make part of their plans. They can help. We'll work together for any of their habitat restoration things they have to do. We're going to try to put this all together so that each rec district and their engineers or board members say, that's a good idea, because if we do this, we get all these benefits, and then they'll have to weigh those benefits against any increase in stage that's not completely mitigated, and we'll make the decision then. But this is not something being rammed down your throats. If the South Delta Water Agency area doesn't like the project eventually, then we'll have to either change it or we won't go forward. The third strategy we want to address is habitat restoration. Now, as you might imagine, right, if we have a huge dredging project, there are going to be permit requirements for mitigation and creating habitat and things like that. The Paradise Cut part of this is pretty much adverse impact neutral, to put it the wrong way. And that is because we're trying to change the overflow land into permanent, raptor habitat. It's going to be a habitat project as well as a flood control. So it may not itself require too much mitigation for environmental purposes. But we want to include those in there so our project is really wonderful and we get the permitting and we get people on board. And I'll get to those specifics in a minute when I get to the habitat parts. So here's the original footprint of the previously conceived Paradise Cut expansion, right? So you go upstream and you put a weir, 1,000-foot weir, and the reason we go upstream is because the analysis of expanding the existing weir didn't get enough the same amount of water as a new weir upstream. That has to do with the slope of the land, levels out near the weir. Anyway, so you get more water. You overflow into these areas. We've already talked to Borba Machado, and there's no deal set, but they say, yeah, we're willing to discuss that, so we're not going in there threatening that we're going to condemn your land and do this. They're willing participants. We'll have to negotiate eventually and obey the rules and pay them what we can if we get that far. But anyway, the overflow goes here. We have a new levee inboard, on the land side, so the water doesn't keep going somewhere else. So we keep the water in here, and then it flows down, and we put it into Paradise Cut. Paradise Cut is that relief bypass, remember I told you? So we want to make sure that we route the water off of the river to help everybody during those peak flows, and the peak flows are the biggest problem. They don't last too long, generally. I don't know about this year. But anyway, so that's the idea, is get those peak flows. They kind of temporarily are in this area, and then they flow downstream. We put them back in Paradise Cut. Now, in order to do that right, you've got to do all sorts of additional engineering analysis. So we have to find out how big, how much improvement, any levee work, any rocking, all these things we might have to do or probably have to do so that Paradise Cut safely contains and transports that water, right? So River Islands over here has done a wonderful job on levee work and everything. We appreciate them. They've been a partner from the very beginning, both money and support. So I want to thank them. But anyway, we want to make sure that anything we do there is agreeable to RD 2062, RD 2058. Everybody who's involved has to be in agreement, so we figure out what we do. And that could include additional levee setbacks, right? That's just a question of land and money and cooperation. So we have to make sure we route the water safely and it gets downstream, okay? Now the original analysis had 5 miles of dredging downstream here to partially address any increase in stage that occurs to that. That's all been subsumed now into the larger dredging program, but the original idea had this dredging and it estimated how that would affect how that would decrease the stage increase down here. So anyway, normally I have a lot more jokes and a lot more funny pictures in my PowerPoints, but I'm old and fat and looking to retire someday. Again, here's that original dredging in that original Paradise Cut project. That's not the larger project that we now have, but in the original Paradise Cut project. So as you guys know, I hope, most of you, we've got some serious siltation problems, especially in the Dowdy Cut of this Four Corners area. Old River too, it keeps going on, a little bit of Grant Line there. So this was the original dredging there. The original dredging is not what we're doing anymore. We've moved on to that, okay, from that. So, as the Paradise Cut project was going forward, I got a call from a local farmer just before Christmas about, 5 years ago now. And he said, John, there's no water in Old River. And I said, oh, there's water in Old River. And he says, John, there's no water in Old River. So I drove out there. It was an oxbow off Old River. And there was a little water around the pump intake. And there was a little bit of water on the other side of the channel, and the water around the pump intake was flowing towards the other water there. That water was 3 or 4 inches deep. It wasn't extreme circumstances. That channel could not be used for diversion of water. So from that, a lot of investigations. We certainly know Undine, the Middle River under Undine Bridge, it's this deep sometimes with the barriers in. Very bad situation. So that gave me a new goal in life, which is to dredge the South Delta channels. Because without that, the situation keeps getting worse. The high flows aren't moving the silt out anymore. We've crossed some threshold, and now we just get larger things. Richard Pellegrini took me out there one day, and there was a sandbar in one year, and the next year after high flows, there was an island, not a sandbar. So we have this serious problem. So anyway, the Watermaster, Delta Watermaster, was very helpful in getting a diverse group of people. Export interests, state water contractors, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, Westlands Water District, Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, they're both Fish and Wildlife's now. DWR and the Bureau staff are all involved with the Water Master in South Delta, and we bellied up some money and did a study for dredging the South Delta. So this is the map for the dredging the South Delta. This doesn't mean it's comprehensive. We're going to ask for your input on where other areas may be that need dredging. So as you can see, I'll take a little credit for every time they drew a line, I said, make it longer. So anyway, we're dredging all of Old River. This is the plan. All of Old River, all the way up to the head. We're dredging Middle River all the way down to the bridge, or the barrier. We're dredging this area because this is a horrible area right there and a lot of problems right there. So it's approximately 25 miles of dredging. The report we produced specifies depths and costs and estimates all sorts of things. That's a starting point. That doesn't mean that's what we're going to do. We want to dredge as deep as possible. Let me just add real quickly, when you have 6 inches of water on Middle River at Undine Bridge, that is not shallow water habitat for fish. That's called warm, generally stagnant water that nothing's in. And so I've taken fishery people out there and I've shown it to them. I said, is that shallow water habitat? And they say, no, that's not shallow water habitat. And so we've actually got fishery agency people. They're not willing to just give us a permit for nothing, but they're saying, yes, you're right. We need to reestablish the habitat in those channels. So this dredging project is actually creating 25 miles of good instead of none, kind of none, shallow water habitat for fish. So we hope that's a big selling point in the future. Governance. As you know, I think, as part of the grant we got from the Delta Conservancy, we were supposed to figure out, okay, how's this going to work? Who's going to take over? That process led to Sanjafka. All the RDs, we talked to everybody. All the RDs were in agreement eventually that Sanjafka could and should be the people that take over. The RDs all signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, which outlined how we're going to do this. So we're going to turn this over to Sanjafka, and they're going to move forward. At the same time, there's an advisory committee that will be formed, and that advisory committee will be us, right? It'll be district engineers, it'll be some of the farmers, trustees of the districts, South Delta's there, American River's there. We're gonna have an advisory committee of us, okay? And everything that needs to be decided is gonna go through us first. Now, I can't get a written guarantee by anybody, right? That if John Herrick says we should do this, we're gonna do it. But that's a really good process. We have some dispute resolution in the memo. We're gonna go through this, and Sanjafka is gonna move forward based on our inputs and our recommendations and our decisions. Of course, the ultimate decision for Sanjafka is the Sanjafka board, right? But that's the way things work. So everything looks pretty good. Now, so Sanjafka will take over. We have the Department of Water Resources here. Why? Well, because DWR has all sorts of interests in the South Delta, and they've been very helpful, and they will be participating with us as we go forward. We don't know the specifics of the project when it gets going, who's going to be doing what contracts from whom. But DWR, we hope, is a nice source of funding also, and they have a lot of expertise, so there may be all sorts of interplay between whoever's in charge and whoever's the contractor to do things, and the government, all those things go forward. So they're a very important advisor. But the advisory committee that's us. So it's not an illusion, it's how we're going to handle this. So the project timeline, 2017. The first San Joaquin Conservancy, Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy grant. The grant monies went to the RCD, our Local Resources Conservation District. And from those monies, we developed that preferred conceptual design that I just showed you about the overflow and the limited dredging. Then we got the second grant, and from that, as the separate process and we went forward, we came up with this idea of adding to the project to add all this dredging. So it's not just an overflow project to address things with habitat. It's also that plus all of this dredging in the South Delta. So it's very important. I hope everybody understands that. Now, in 2022, again, based on that second grant, we came up with the MOU, got everybody together. We had decided on the method by which we would run the program, so to speak, and how we would keep everybody involved. Now, 2023, because of the efforts of Mr. Rothard over there, we're going to get, it's not in my pocket yet, but we're going to get $3 million for for Sanjafka so they can move forward. The JPA that South Delta has with River Islands has bellied up a little money to help them in the interim before they get the funding, but we're going to get this $3 million. There's another $10 million out there that I can't tell you too much about, but it's been earmarked for this process too. So the very helpful and cooperative people at DWR have, made an effort to get us this nice chunk of money up front, right? So we can move forward. So that's the project timeline. The future is up to how things go in the let me back up. Sorry. So let me just finish with that. Anybody has some questions now, please ask me. But I want you to understand that we have this beautifully looking project with all this habitat, and all this habitat, and we're going to make this a really, really good project. And so I'm not quite at the right place to say this, but we've identified an island that we can turn into any habitat we want. Salmon Slough, as many of you know, is a clogged, nasty-looking thing. It's probably got old meth labs besides all sorts of trash and brambles, right? Right? We've got the southeast border of Grant Line Canal is a big mess of habitat, right? We've got many, many channel islands. We've got upstream of Tom Paine Slough. We've got all sorts of areas that we can turn into nice habitat that not only benefits us in the area, but the rest of the world looks at that and says, that's good too, right? Right now, the South Delta is kind of devoid of fishery and other species. Well, it shouldn't be that way. So if we can figure out how to do it with our input, with what we think works, in conjunction with the protection of our area, then everything can go smoothly, right? So the next part about money is who's going to pay for this, right? So I learned that I didn't know what I was doing a year and a half ago, so I'm trying to learn how to do it the right way. So a lot of people, including me, American Rivers, and others, we're now trying to do it the right way. Local representatives, both state and federal, how do we get money? Where do we get this stuff? We got to get that. A huge dredging project is not in the budgets of all of our RDs, right? We're not going to be able to do that. So we have to find other people's money, which is a wonderful principle to do things by, and we're going to make sure we get this stuff going. So I think that's the end of my stuff.
John?
Certainly.
I mean, the people that benefit the most from this are downstream of the weir, right? Like Lathrop and Manteca and City of Stockton. So wouldn't they be the ones that would pay for a good portion of the benefit?
That's to be determined. That's exactly right. The benefit is not only the agricultural land, but the cities, the urban areas along the San Joaquin River. So yes, and they've been very cooperative so far, but when it comes down to it, we'll have to see. But yes, they should help pay for that. The dredging part, which I think is, more just as important, they're not going to take interest in that. But remember that we had exporters interested in the dredging program. They bellied up money, so they're still in favor of that. So there may come a time when there's a lot of shared cost sharing, and that our typical enemy may be on our side trying to get this done, because that helps them too. But those are all to be determined, and those are all what you mentioned is that's certainly one of the arguments about where can we get money. So that's true. Urban areas can afford more than the farmland generally. Yes?
Question on the opposite side. I have no problem when I see flood control, let us control. Downside, low flow. What is the elevation at Bernalis when the water stops going over the weir to Paradise Cut?
I think Chris mentioned 18,000 CFS. In dry times,
I only know by sea level.
I know, sorry. In drier times, the weir does not take any water over it. And the current weir at Paradise Cut, it takes water at about 17,000 CFS at Vernalis. So I don't know what that stage is, but anyway, this one won't take it until that same kind of time frame. So in dry times, this will not siphon off extra water. Now, we may, as part of our program, reestablish a net flow in Paradise Cut, but we'd have to work that out so we don't harm anybody by taking a percentage of a low flow and redirecting it. But net flows in channels are what's important, right? Keep water quality good. So that's one of the possibilities. If we have to rework Paradise Cut, we may actually increase or design something that has flow in that. Anyway, but yes.
Well, we farm downstream of Paradise Cut too, so.
Yes, there's a diversion from the river into Paradise Cut, and then that water comes out for farmland.
Within Paradise Cut
Yes.
during the summer. So if you put more water down Paradise Cut during the summer, you'll have to purchase that farming interest.
No, they could still divert. We would just have additional net flow.
I do not understanding.
I'm not here to screw any of the farmers.
All right, well, it wasn't clear that you were stating that, so just wanted
That's
to
right.
clarify that.
Thank you. There's another question?
The Vernalis, I think my brother Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Vernalis is at 20, it starts going through the weir.
The original, this is what I know, it doesn't mean it's true. The original plan for the Paradise Cut Weir was at like 19,000 at Vernalis, it would start flowing over the weir. Because of siltation, it starts flowing over lower amounts of that. Whatever that is, we'll have to do soundings again, we'll figure out the exact number so we know it's right, but yes. Okay, so I've talked too long already. I think the next slide is Bill Eisenstein from ESA, who's one of our consultants and has been very helpful and won't talk as badly as I do.
That's okay. I think I don't need that because for some reason I got the Britney Spears treatment. I don't know.
I have one too, but that's for the video people.
Oh, okay. Oh, so I need both.
It's entirely up to you.
That works better.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification. Yes, I'm Bill Eisenstein with Environmental Science Associates. I just want to start by echoing what Petrea and Phil and John have all said, which is thank you for being here this morning. I know it's been a hectic time, hopefully not too stressful a time, but I know everybody's busy and your time is really valuable, and we really appreciate spending a little of it with us this morning. I also want to mention, I know the slides are getting just maybe a touch washed out on the screen, so I do want to make a couple references to the report or the handout, which hopefully almost all of you have, or all of you. This is actually two memos stapled together in this thick packet.
And so the images that I'm going to show on the screen appear in this sort of the second half of this document. So at points, I'll maybe make a page reference in case it's easier to look at this, in the document here than seeing it on the screen, particularly for those who are in the back. So there's actually two different page numbering systems. In the first memo here, the pages are numbered, like 3 of 18 or 4 of 18. And then the second memo, which is the one written by ESA and the one I'm addressing right now, just has the regular, just a single digit page number at the bottom. And so those are the numbers I'm going to be using just for reference. So for example, this image is on page 3 of that second memo. So I'll make a few more references, but just in case that's helpful for people as we move through here. As was mentioned, ESA performed a kind of a preliminary analysis that was layered on top of previous analysis that had been conducted by MBK engineers in 2019, which was of that original preferred conceptual design that John showed several minutes ago, the original design with the 5 miles of dredging and 2 feet depth. And so that's what the hydraulic information that I'm going to be showing you is based upon. And then ESA did some supplemental analysis to understand a little more about what those hydraulics what kind of issues they would present in terms of levee failure risk and other downstream impacts. As mentioned, I'll talk a little more about the dredging components as well, and I'll talk a little after the break about some of the strategies that may be helpful for addressing some of these risks that have been identified here. I just want to emphasize from the beginning that nothing you're seeing is final, nothing is binding. This is preliminary analysis based, again, on a project that doesn't even have a formal project description yet. As Phil said, we should probably call this a proposal instead of a project. It's a concept. We don't even have even the first form of engineering designs of any of this. So everything you see today is informational. It's for understanding, actually for scoping the project as it will eventually move forward. So yeah, let me start here. Again, this is on page 3 of that second memo. These are the basic sort of potential modes of levee failure. Very logical, I'm sure, intuitive to everybody in this room. But basically, we can think in terms of overtopping risk, erosion risk, and then seepage failure risk. And of course, seepage can occur either through a levee or under a levee. So you'll see this sort of terminology brought through here in a couple places, but just to offer a simple illustration of what we're talking about when we talk about these potential levee failure risks. We took the hydraulic analysis of the project that had been done by MBK in 2019 that focused on the 1997 flood. John referred to this already. That's approximately a 100-year flood, more or less. So it's useful for that purpose because that's a common standard in flood engineering. It's also useful because it's a real event that actually happened. It's not a simulation, so we can, we have some evidence that it's a real thing. It illustrated, or that analysis showed what the effect on flows would be of the implementation of that preferred conceptual design. So what we then did is ask the question, okay, if those flows do come through this levee landscape, what would we expect to see happen? And the basic form of information that we were able to use to determine that, or to estimate that, to begin to estimate it, is what are called index points. And these are the 5 index points that were used, and this is somewhat more clearly visible on page 4 of that memo, if you want a little bit of a tighter shot of this.
I can't read the number for the orange one down there.
Yeah, that, again, you probably could see it better on the page 4. That's SJ42 down there. In case it's, for those who may not have a handout, there's 2 index points to the right over here at the downstream end of essentially the western end of Stewart Tract. SJ40, that yellow one, and then there's 2 others to the left, SJ41 up on Grant Line and SJ42 on Old River.
Is that Tracy Boulevard right there, I assume?
Yes, that's correct. The purpose of the color coding is to underscore the point that the way this analysis works, and these index points were identified by the Department of Water Resources or engineers working for the Department of Water Resources as part of the 2017 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. These individual index points are meant to represent very long reaches of levee, and that's what the color coding shows. So for example, you can see that SJ41, the green one up top there.
Just really quickly, you have a pointer actually on the middle button there, if you want to think. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Petrea. SJ41, this green one up here, is meant to represent the entirety of the levee in green. And in fact, the next slide is just zooming out on the same thing, but meant just to show, to encompass the entirety of these levee reaches that are meant to be represented by these single index points. So again, the color coding, SJ40 is right here, but it's meant to represent this entire reach of levee. And so one of the questions that I'll get to in a moment here is how representative are these? As Phil, I think it was, said in particular, nobody knows these levees better than you do. These index points, I mean, it's just 1 point. There's a limit to how representative it can be. And so one of the things we want to learn from you and hear from you both today and moving forward in the process is what are the real conditions in the levees out there? And in particular, not so much the average condition, but where are the weakest points? Because of course, that's what really matters in a high flow situation, right? If the levee just breaks once at its weakest point, we're in trouble, right? It doesn't matter so much what the average is. So in essence, for each of those index points, DWR and its consulting engineers developed these levee failure curves. And you'll see these begin, if you want to look more closely, these begin on page 5 of the handout. It might be easier to read some of the y-axis and x-axis information. But you'll see up top, and I just showed 2 here that are kind of representative of all 5 of them, that the index points were each sort of given a grade for each of those levee failure risks that I referred to. So there's under seepage, through seepage, stability hazard, and erosion hazard characterized there with just a letter grade. So in this case, you see some C minuses. On the right here, you see some A's. LD means low data or lack of data. So that's another thing we need to really keep in mind as we look at these. So in essence, all these are doing on the x-axis is the water surface elevation. And on the y-axis is the probability of failure of the levee as a function of all of those potential failure modes. So you can simply see that, well, the design water surface elevation is indicated on each of these. And you can simply see, and basically what the analysis is with that hydraulic modeling, looking at what happens to water surface elevation in these locations, and if you move rightward in water surface elevation, getting higher, what happens to your failure risk? How much more do you go up the curve? And so I showed these 2. Again, you can see all 5 of them in the document, but these are pretty representative of the 2 basic situations. You see the curve, the shape of the curve is very different in these 2 cases, right? In this case, we've got a pretty steep curve, and this is representative of those 3 index points that are more on the eastern side of the project area, or more or less clustered around that downstream end of Stewart Tract. And then you've got a couple that are the more basically Grant Line and Old River. Yeah, Phil, go ahead.
Question.
Yeah.
Okay, on SJ40, I see that the design WSC is at let's say 17 feet. And then on SJ42, it's just barely more than 12 feet. I don't quite understand why the big difference between SJ40 and SJ42
Yes.
being approximately 5 feet.
Yes. Good question. And the basic answer, and actually, I mean, Chris or others who are,
Go back to the map and
yeah.
show the locations of those 2. Right?
Yeah. So yeah, SJ40 is right here, and SJ42 is right here. Sorry, 42. The basic answer has to do with the width of the channel. So a given amount of water can flow through, but be at a higher elevation in a narrower, if it's being tightened up by a narrower channel. And if it gets out into a wider canal or wider channel, then it'll spread out and shallow out a little bit. So that's the basic answer.
It's the gradient of the river.
Yeah.
So the gradient of the river is falling as you move westerly, and you're moving into the delta pool.
Okay.
So you're in a riverine gradient coming down Paradise Cut. As you move west, you're starting to come into the delta pool.
Okay.
And I forgot I was asked to repeat the questions. Did everybody hear the question? And maybe I will repeat it for the video, but the question had to do with the difference in elevation between the water surface elevation being shown at 17 feet at SJ40 and being shown a little above 12 feet at SJ42. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Dominic Gooley, and I'm the Reclamation District Engineer for Reclamation District 1007, which is SJ42, and I appreciate all the work you guys have done on this. That orange dot there, SJ42, is a pretty big levee, but as a matter of fact, this storm that we had in January, I believe that it might be almost exactly on a spot where we have nearly vertical on the water side. But our levee is at elevation 20, approximately, in that area. So anyways, there is data. We've done a 5-year plan. We have cross sections. We've actually included the potential to do something for the Paradise Cut within the Delta Levee Subventions Program. But the exceedance curves, I'm not sure, you know, even a 2% chance of failure, or 0.2%, 5%,
Yeah, well,
Well, but for my curve over here, it's still a 5%. Like I said, our levies are substantial.
yeah,
I encourage you to, I'd like to look more into that. But our basic problem down here, our levees are high enough. There's a lot of vegetation on the water side. It's already a very natural habitat down there. And we just need to stabilize our banks. And I
Yeah.
don't think that we can do setback levees down there because of the vegetation, but
So-
we do need our steep banks.
yeah. I mean, what you started with, this is exactly the kind of information that we want and need for the future phases. I mean, this is, again, this is like a small budget preliminary kind of look at this based on these index points. But the kind of precise local knowledge about conditions is what needs to inform the work going forward. So that's everything you said and more. We'd like to get recorded and put into, either recorded now in verbal form or in a written form and get it into future phases of the project. I do see more hands. Let me tie up this topic area, and then we can kind of pause, okay? I do want to point out just, again, the shape of the curve. So in these easterly index points, as water surface elevation is rising, levee failure risk is rising pretty quick, right? It's a pretty high curve here. In these two more downstream ones, and I think this gets to the last couple of comments, the channel's a lot wider. The levees have in some cases much better grades according to this rating system. And so as you move rightward on the elevation, as the elevation's getting higher, failure risk is not rising as fast. It is still rising, but it's not rising nearly as fast as it is over here. So that's just a basic kind of distinction here. And so it gets to this results table, which is on page 8, I believe it is in the memo, if it's easier to see the numbers there, which just summarizes the basic information here. Again, it's got the design water surface elevations. It's got the hazard ratings for all the different forms or modes of levee failure. And then it's got the sort of probability of failure at the design water surface elevation. And in some cases, you can see that number is pretty high already, even before any project occurs. And then what we did is added 0.3 feet to it. And where that number came from is that is the largest increase that the hydraulic modeling showed at any point in the downstream area. So we were attempting to be conservative by choosing the largest potential impact and applying it to all locations. And that also has the benefit of kind of being more of an apples to apples comparison between different points. So you can get a better comparative look at these issues. So we just added 0.3 feet to the design water surface elevation and used those curves to get to that change in levee failure performance. Again, maybe it's clearer and maybe things are getting a little blocked for some people. But you can see that in these easterly three, you got somewhere between 14 and 30%, and in these downstream to the Grant Line and Old River situations, it's showing only a 2% change in levee failure probability. Again, because that curve was so much flatter and not rising as quickly. So maybe I'll pause in this gentleman in the back.
Yeah, Danny DeGraff, 2095 engineer. Just talk about the data, it seems like the model was largely based off of the 97 floods. It seems like there's probably a cluster of information that would be useful for modeling right now, since we've had a same high flow. So I'm just wondering, is there any plans or any ongoing data collection for what's going on from
Repeat the question.
here all the way to the system? I mean, all the sequence points, all the boils that are happening, it would be a large effort. It seems logical to go collect some of that data and organize that data for all the areas that might be impacted. I was wondering if that's happening or planned to be happening right now.
Yeah, just to repeat the question for the video, basically it has to do with whether there's data collection going on right now under our current high flow situation to inform the future. Actually, Chris, I don't know, I'd invite you to comment on that if you know of things, or John or any others.
To gather it from the records kept now.
Yeah,
Ongoing part of this project.
Yeah, I think from what I understand, the basic situation is all typical data gathering operations are continuing. Of course, we'll have gauge readings from a number of places. We'll have all of that. But so at some point in the future, we'll be able to look back retrospectively on that. I'm not aware of anything supplemental happening as far as data collection for flows in the South Delta right now. So Chris and John both seem to be shaking their heads too. So yeah, I think nothing supplemental beyond the ordinary is happening right now. I will say that, we do have certain forms of data collection are much better technologically than they were like the last time we had a high flow, and you're an engineer, so you're well aware, like remote sensing, aerial photos, like we have a lot more of that sort of thing than we did even in 2017, never mind 1997. So we can look back into the past a little bit better than we used to be able to.
Kind of logical maybe to some of the river stages where not just using the gauges, but we could take measurements that where the weirs and the existing elevations down Paradise that might inform hydraulic modeling better with real data rather than looking back or trying to use 97 or 2017 data.
Yeah, great point. Yep.
Why is the curve so steep? I mean, if it goes a 2-foot rise in elevation, basically doubles the probability of a levee failure. Is that what causes that?
Well, essentially,
I know the curve says that, but what makes the curve so steep?
Well, so part of it is that it's a constrained channel laterally, so as more flow comes in, the elevation's rising pretty quickly. I guess one thing I should have clarified is that none of this has anything to do with overtopping risk. It's erosion and seepage risk that get you first, and I think that's probably intuitive, right? I mean, as the water's rising, even before it gets to the levee crown, there's a lot of velocity usually in a high flow situation. There's a lot of erosion and there's seepage. And basically the hydrostatic pressure of the water on the levee is rising pretty quickly. It's rising even faster than the water surface elevation is. And so it's basically the weight of the water, in essence, is sort of pushing its way through the levee and finding weak points either underneath or in the body of the levee for through seepage.
The 2 foot of water is going to double the failure mode, seems.
Well, I don't know about double, but it is rising in some of these cases, yeah. So in this case, it's going from 51% to 70%.
I'm looking at the chart using basically 2 feet of water. 2 foot would make it go from 0.2 to 0.4.
But isn't that what the model has determined?
Yeah, that's
true or not? That's what the modeling predicts.
Yeah, this is a modeling estimation. So again, and this is a preliminary analysis, so.
I can make a model 2 times 2 would equal 5, too.
Well, but if you're going to start an analysis, you have to start with the existing ways of analyzing it. And then one of those are just DWR, of course. So their model is used to do this initial evaluation. If we don't think it's right, eventually we'll have to do something else. But we'll just start with the current set of analytical tools also.
Right, absolutely. Again, just to recap, there was a question about what causes the failure risk to rise as steeply as it does. And so this is a characterization, again, based on these limited index points. And what we want to learn from you, and I think we need to go to our break, but the break actually is a good opportunity for us to start gathering insight from you. There's a map in the back. And so one of the things we'd like to learn about is, again, you see the index points, but how representative are these really? And where are there challenging points in the levee system that ought to be flagged for the analysis moving forward? Again, no one knows that better than you all. And so if you have anything to share on those topics, then we have a system back here where you can put a Post-it note on a map. There's comment forms behind the report or the memo that you got. I think there was a loose 8.5 by 11 sheet where you can write out a comment. And any verbal input also is very welcome. But we just want to start gathering that insight from you all. So we'll do that. We'll have a break, 10 minutes long, and then at the end of that, I'll say a few more things, and then John's going to say some more at about 10:30, and hopefully we'll also be hearing from you all.
I'll just really quickly. We actually probably should, if it's okay, just 7-minute break, just so we can make sure we have time to hear your feedback. But there is coffee and food in the back here, and so we encourage you to have some. And Daniel, please write down your question, even if you've asked the question and we've heard it, it is on video, but please write it down too. And Dominic, I think you had some ideas for your district. Please write those down, because it's great for us to have them twice. Thank you.
Topics that I'm covering, which is looking at the channel depth restoration issues that John and others already touched on, and then to talk a little bit about some of the, again, very conceptual planning level strategies that might be used or might be considered for use as part of eventually a real engineering design of this project. So as John mentioned early on, dredging is a feature of this project. And I emphasize the word feature because as John and Petrea and others who've been involved in this for a long time have heard you say in the past that that is a critical component of anything that would occur in this project concept space. And so I want to emphasize that dredging, this is a project concept that includes dredging. We're not simply putting dredging in here as like a flow management measure or a mitigation. It's a central component of the project, right along with the new weir, right along with the habitat restoration and all the other components that John mentioned at the outset. As you know, and he emphasized, dredging does bring other benefits beyond only improving the hydraulics and potentially reducing levee failure risk. It also brings, it does at least provide the basis for aquatic habitat. By itself, it doesn't create aquatic habitat, but it provides the basis for aquatic habitat, and it also, of course, will have water supply benefits as well. So again, I guess I said this already, but the hydraulic model that I showed that was the basis of what you just saw included the scope of dredging that existed in 2019. So that was the 5 miles of dredging at 2-foot depth. The hydraulic analysis and the levee failure analysis did show that did contribute to reducing water surface elevations and therefore reducing levee failure risk. But it's by no means the only action that would reduce those things, and it's possibly not the most effective action, which is why it's important to include it in the project from the beginning as a component, as opposed to sort of framing it as a kind of a mitigation measure or a harm reduction measure. So again, as John emphasized, since the 2019 project concept was developed, the potential scope of the dredging has been expanded quite substantially. And so now you see that it encompasses 25 miles of channels, essentially the entire length of Old River, Middle River, all the way up to, for a long distance downstream of the Paradise Cut itself. And so if one of the questions on your mind naturally might be, well, if we dredge more, is it going to affect the water surface elevations and the levee failure risks that we just saw? The answer is probably yes, but it's not necessarily a clear one-to-one or straightforward relationship. And part of that is because of, as you know, we're down very close to tidal elevation. The hydrodynamics of the South Delta are extremely complex, so it's not necessarily the case that if you dredged 4 feet instead of 2 feet, would it double the benefits? Not necessarily, because the hydrodynamics are complex, and because at some point you hit tidal elevation and water that's flowing in from the river starts to back up essentially against the tides, against sea level. And so the real answer as to what effect this additional dredging will have on the levee failure risks is still to be determined. Like, this little preliminary analysis is nowhere near enough to determine that question. It's going to have to really, be a substantial engineering study that's going to have to look at that, and a hydraulic modeling study But, you know, that's all sort of to be determined how much effect that is and what that will show. So for now, we want to think about the proper scope of dredging in the project on the basis of the multiple benefits that it brings, not only the hydraulic issue, but the other benefits, and to think about that in the full scope. So again, this is just a spot, and I'll pause in just 1 second. This is just a spot where, again, we need your input, your expertise on this question. We just need your opinions, basically, your informed opinions about whether this is the right areas to be dredging, what would be the optimal locations to be dredging. Are there problem spots? It may well be the case that, these are sort of represented as continuous lines, and I'm just speculating here, but it may be the case that it doesn't have to be occurring everywhere along that line, right? There might just be choke points, particular locations where if we took care of that and deepen the channel, then we get a lot of benefit up and down alongside it. That could be the case. So just looking for those locations where, where we really need those of you who have your eyes on the ground every day, every week, every month can inform that. So this is another place where if you have comments, insights, points you'd like to make, you've got your comment sheet. And I was told by Petrea that there's a box toward, this is for the end of the meeting, but when you're done with those, there's a box. Krista's holding it up right now at the front table there where, when your comment sheets are done, you can drop it in there. But again, indicating spots on the map would also be very beneficial. To the extent you really have specific locations in mind, you can point us to those. Eric had a question. Oops, sorry. Yeah.
So, one component of the project obviously is the second weir that, will lower the downstream stage in the San Joaquin, and then you've got the dredging component, which, serves a number of purposes. Seems like we're missing the element that could address both of those by dredging upper part of Old River, Paradise Cut, and even the San Joaquin River. Obviously, the capacity in those channels is significantly less than what was designed for by the Corps.
Yes, there are various issues though. So the extent to which we change Paradise Cut is to be determined, right? We got to make sure X amount of water going in there can safely pass through it and pass out. So there are a lot of stuff. The preliminary design there for the dredging is a preliminary one. Now we have Banna Carbona here, and when I talked to them about, I think the main stem of the San Joaquin needs to be dredged too, and they said, our intake is over here at the Thalwig, and so if you dredge the whole channel, where's the water level in summer for our pumps? And I said, thank you, goodbye. No. So, those are the specific kind of issues. The San Joaquin River needs to be dredged in the abstract for flood protection, for carrying capacity, but there are impacts. And so I assured Banna Carbona, I said, that's not on the dredging program right now. If it's on a dredging program in the future, it'll be a program that those people along that river say, yes, that's a good idea, and this is how we would do it. Because those specific things are very, very important, and they may not appear on the surface when you're examining it. So, sorry for yapping.
No, it's good. Maybe in the back?
Hi, I'm Mary Hildebrand, and I'm up in that area that's going to benefit a great deal from this project, but I wasn't raised to get what I need by stepping on other people. So all along here, I've been advocating for making sure the downstream areas are taken care of, and that this had to be part of the project and not mitigation. So I want to make sure that everybody understands, and I want John to speak a little bit about, it may feel overwhelming that you're supposed to be giving all this feedback right here on the spot. There is going to be an advisory group, I don't think you touched on, John, that the Flood Control Agency is going to work with as we move forward. And I would just beg, it would help us so much if we already had this year. In my area, on the South Delta Board, I represent the RDs on both sides of the river and downstream of Vernalis, where we're really struggling and always struggling, I close. So just keep an open mind and please keep engaged in the process, because we want you to be sure you are taken care of so that we can get this help. And John, can you talk about that, the way they can continue participating?
Yeah.
Yes, we did touch on earlier the advisory committee for this, to Sanjafka's process. But that's the key here, this is, it's well beyond an idea, but we're not there yet. So we're trying to make sure that everybody's taken care of. We're not trying to shift one burden onto somebody else. And as you might imagine, South Delta Water Agency can't choose sides on internal conflicts or things like that. So our board has been very clear, and my direction is very clear, that in order to do any project, we have to make sure it's okay with everybody else. Now, I don't know if we'll have some landowner that gets upset eventually, but we're going to try to address all that. That's why the system set up now is with this advisory committee. We're going to have the engineers for the RDs. We're going to have RD trustees, South Delta, other people. We're going to go over this stuff. And so when the engineer for Pescadero Track says, I don't want more water, we have to address that. We have to figure out how that works. And we might reach a point where we can't do something, but that's not what we're going to look forward to. We're going to address everybody's issue and move forward then. So along the way, everybody needs to be a part of this. We will try to keep you informed. And of course, the advisory committee that we have will be that function, to perform that
John,
function.
I think it'd be important to explain too that this project, the water agency is taking advantage of a regional flood project to benefit water supply as well. We haven't touched upon that, but the dredging will perform tremendous benefit from a water supply perspective. That same condition you had in Old River occurs every summer in Middle River, where we don't have enough water to our pumps. And having a dredged Middle River, and for that matter, these other rivers, will provide us that volume of water that we're currently not seeing.
At some point, we produced a summary paper on the dredging aspect of the larger dredging aspect, and that explains all that stuff. And so I can get that to anybody who wants. But that's one of the big issues here. When Middle River has 7 inches of water, 8 inches of water, a foot of water in it, that doesn't work. And so people call me every year and say, John, I can't irrigate here because the water level's too low. We've got to solve that. Now, this also addresses exporter issues because the exporters pull water through the channels to their thing, and when they can't pull enough water from one place, it comes from another place because of hydrodynamics, and their conflicts arise. So everybody who's involved in this says, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Water supply, water reliability, water quality is improved if we do certain things. And so it's a benefit to all of the beneficial uses. We just have to make sure that as we configure it, it doesn't push an impact to somewhere else that's not addressed. And again, we say this over and over again. I'm sorry for being repetitive, but it's up to you guys, through your representatives or you personally, to talk to us along the way. It doesn't have to be by tomorrow or anything, to make sure your concerns are addressed. And we're going to do that. And if we can't do that, somebody will shoot me and we'll move on and we won't have any project. So, rest assured that we're here to help. I know that sounds ridiculous coming from people with a microphone and I'm kind of the government. Anyway, so yes.
Thank you. And maybe just to emphasize one thing in response to Mary's comment earlier, the opportunity, if anybody's feeling like you're on the spot today to provide input, please let me reassure you, the window is open for literally probably a couple of years, if not more from now. Yeah. I mean, we've got the feasibility study coming that was mentioned, and more's going to be said about that at the end, where this funding from DWR is going to come to Sajafka, and it's going to keep advancing this analysis and engineering work and move us toward a real project design that would then become the basis for engineering analysis and engineering design. I mean, that whole process is going to take a couple of years, right? Just to get to the starting line of an engineering design process. So there's lots of time. Don't worry about that, but just please keep the comments and input coming whenever it strikes you. Today would be a good start, but but the window's definitely open. So Dominic again, and then this gentleman, and then maybe I'll move on to the other topic after that, so we can keep moving through our agenda.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you for the Resource Conservation District, because they did get us involved early, as Mary said, and to see that map up there and to see the old river being dredged all along there is good, but I don't see the Grant Line Canal being dredged. And the concern that my district has is that if you deepen the old river, all the water may come towards us rather than going into the Grant Line Canal. It looks to me like Grant Line Canal is very huge there to the left of the word Fabian, and maybe you might consider putting a channel right across Fabian track there and get the water to the canal. Now, the one thing that you got to keep in mind is Clifton Court Forebay, the pumps are right there. And I'm the district engineer for Upper Jones Tract up there. When the pumps are on, the tide is reversed. So they're so strong that they can pull the water and reverse the tide. So in a flood situation with those pumps fully on, the water is going to be affected by that. And I think that if you can get it somewhere and get it to that thick part of Grant Line Canal, the pumps will take over from there. So, and another thing I think that maybe should be given some consideration is Tom Payne Slough down there is challenged for water. I'm not sure that you could use it as a flood control component, but there might be some opportunities there to wetland restoration or something like that. There's opportunities there, and that district, I believe, would be interested in. Tom Payne Slough is Toolies in a lot of areas,
Yeah.
so I don't think you could really push too much water through there, but there might be some advantage to restoring that to its original condition.
So there are a lot of good ideas in there. Would you think maybe you could note some of those down in bullet points on the comment sheet maybe so we can maintain those?
I'll make up a list of comments because I'm holding back.
Yeah, that'd be great. But yeah, the thought of maintaining appropriate flow splits among different channels, that's another, I think, important subject that would be addressed by a hydraulic model done on a real project design. One more question back here and then we can move on.
Basically, same comment. Wouldn't it make sense from Old River to the Forebay, just to sound the whole system, not only for depth of the channels, but also the width, and then do calculations of, what's the capacity of each system? So before you do it, you have an idea of where your problems will come from.
To do a sounding, is that what you said? Yeah. Yeah.
The depth of all the channels to that system.
Most of that was done
Here,
in the
John.
report we had. Sorry. Most of that was done preliminarily in the report we did that led to the planning guide for the dredging. So South Delta and some DWR new stuff, we sounded most of the channels. They went through the calculations of capacity, how deep you want to go. They looked at prior surveys from years ago. Where do you want to establish that? So that's all preliminary been done, but that is exactly right. We have to figure out how much water goes where, under what circumstances, and make sure everybody's okay. Now, another part that was touched upon is when you start dredging, if you can't dredge everything in one season, right? You got to make sure that where you stop doesn't change the flow patterns that winter if it gets wet. So that's up to dredging people to lecture us on and figure it out. But those are all the issues that we have to examine and see if we can solve them. We can solve them, but a lot to that, and not just John Herrick wants to dredge. So, yes.
Yeah, I'll just note one other kind of thing before we move on the dredging topic, and it's similar to the levees, and it's basically a common sense idea, is that it does matter a lot what the general condition, the typical condition along a long reach of channel is, but it also matters what are the tight choke points, and with the levee it's like what is the weakest point. And with the dredging, it's kind of like, where's the tightest choke point? Obviously, you kind of want to relieve those first probably, and get, reduce those bottlenecks onto how the water flows through. And so maybe you can also phase things or approach it that way. Again, much more analysis needed. But generally, that kind of common sense logic does apply in those kinds of situations. Okay, let me spend a few minutes just talking about a few of these downstream flood risk reduction items. Again, if that's hard to read, this is actually one it's in the RCD memo. So the first half of your packet, the one that has the pages marked are labeled as, in this case, it would be starting on page 6 of 18. And then it goes for several pages afterward. There's some illustrations of some of these. There's greater description, so you can read that when you have time. But I just want to kind of cruise through these quickly, again, just to kind of feed our thinking about how what's possible. And so beginning kind of in the upper left, hard to read, but we've got up there using dredge spoils to improve downstream levees. So John mentioned this earlier. It is, again, kind of common sense that if you're pulling a lot of dredge material out of the channels, wouldn't it be great if we could use it in some form to strengthen levees, either by directly perhaps widening or heightening levees. And if you heighten a levee, you do have to widen it because you have to expand the base if you're going to increase the height. But also the possibility of perhaps doing what's known as a seepage berm behind a levee, where you're basically building a bench that's sort of there to prevent boiling and under seepage from coming under the levee. That can be appropriate in many situations. So to the extent possible, of course, it would be very good, both for cost reasons and other reasons, to use dredge spoils if possible. One thing that can be a deal breaker in those situations is if those dredge spoils are contaminated with any kind of toxic material that you wouldn't want spread on the surface for any reason, farm field or habitat or any terrestrial use. The Anchor report that John mentioned did analyze that topic. It did some initial analysis, and it did not discover any contamination problems of concern at that first level of analysis. So it's kind of a so far so good on that topic, but it's something that will have to continue to be analyzed as a process like this moves forward. And of course, moving a lot of earth, if you had to take those dredge spoils somewhere else, if you couldn't use them locally or you didn't use them locally, you've got to dispose of them somewhere else. That's a big deal with impacts. You also have the expense of trucking, which is, adds up. Anyway, so a lot of reasons why it's logical to use it locally if possible. Stabilizing levees with riprap. Of course, this is pretty traditional. You see this everywhere, but some kind of quarry stone or other hard stone placed on the water side of levees, primarily to reduce erosion-related seepage too, but primarily to resist erosion. When high water comes through fast, it's just, it likes to cut through soil, cut through banks, but obviously it's much harder to do that through stone or any other kind of rigid material like that. Decreasing levee seepage with cutoff walls and seepage berms. These are what we would think of as like pretty traditional structural solutions. Those of you who are RD engineers, of course, know these things better than I do. But cutoff walls, like a rigid wall that you would embed inside of a levee to resist that through seepage. And seepage berms, as I mentioned, would be like material mounded behind the levee, lower than the levee, but kind of down as a lower bench, but resisting that under seepage that might come through a levee. So that's another possibility. Setting back levees to decrease the flood risk. Again, you saw in some of those cases, I guess I didn't emphasize it much on the map, but I'll just go back quickly. And you all know this very well, but in some of these locations, the channel's getting pretty narrow laterally. So there could be locations, again, this is all just conceptual toolbox type thinking at this point, but there could be locations where setting back and widening out the channel would make some sense and reduce some of those failure risks. Reconnecting floodplains to decrease sediment. So John just mentioned about sediment dynamics. We talked about it with dredging. Sediment dynamics of the lower San Joaquin River system are not very well understood in general. There's no good model, the state doesn't have a model. Nobody really has a good functioning sediment model that shows us how sediment travels through the lower San Joaquin and how it would travel into Paradise Cut when the weir does spill. Again, the South Delta is really complicated because of the tidal dynamics, and there's water washing both directions in and out all the time. It has sediment too, so there's just a lot to be understood about that. But if it is the case that Paradise Cut spills or flows do bring sediment in from the San Joaquin, it may be desirable, rather than having that sediment settle in the deep parts of the channels, which is kind of undoing the dredging, over time, maybe it's better to try to find other places for that sediment to fall out of the water. So that's another, again, just a conceptual thought that might apply in these situations. Decreasing levee erosion using vegetation. This can be an alternative to riprap in some situations, against addressing the same kind of thing, trying to resist the erosive force of the water, but doing it with vegetation plantings instead of hard materials. Obviously, that's better for habitat. There are challenges with that, as I think most of us know. Vegetation on levees is a controversial topic. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, for example, does not generally permit vegetation, or not the intentional planting of vegetation into levees that are part of the state and federal project, which is the case for the levees as far down as essentially the west end of Stewart Tract. Those are what we call project levees. So there are complexities with this, but there are situations where you can get the same kind of erosion resistance benefits from vegetation and also get some habitat benefit that would go along with that. Integrating ecological levee rehabilitation elements. And so this is a bit of a composite of a few others, a kind of a more deluxe model of perhaps creating a second levee, like a setback levee behind an original levee, breaching that original levee in a couple of places so that you can create a kind of a designed side channel or back channel habitat behind the original flood control levee, but still have a good setback levee behind that that's providing flood protection at least as good, hopefully better, than the original levee. Our friends at KSN have some design experience with this. And so this is something that's been tried in a couple of locations, could have applicability. And then finally, as simple as it sounds, there's monitoring and maintenance of levees, and that's just the bread and butter of how intensively the levees are monitored and watched, and how active the maintenance is. And so it could be the case, again, not rendering any judgments, but it could be the case that in some of these situations where we might have a relatively modest increase in levee risk, maybe some funding for an increased tempo of maintenance and monitoring, and just increased activity on those fronts, addressing small problems before they become big problems, might do enough. In some cases, possibly, we don't have to do a big, expensive structural thing. But again, all 8 of these this is all just food for thought as we move through this analysis. But again, like I've said, now this will be the 3rd time, any of your input that you have on these is very welcome. We want to hear your perspectives on this stuff, where you think these different solutions may be appropriate, other costs and benefits to these things that may not be obvious to at first glance, but that you guys are well aware of in your work. Questions? Dominic has one, and then other questions we can pause, and then I'll be transitioning back to John after that.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that, stabilizing levees with riprap is very important, but prior to doing that, first we will have to restore the waterside levee slope to its original condition, because now they're vertical. When they were originally built, they were flatter, 2 to 1 or so, and that needs to be done before we can put the riprap on. So maybe if you could add to that black circle up there the words "restore to the original slope."
Okay. And for the sake of the video, I haven't been great about this all the way through, but repeating the question or the comment, yeah, the thought of adding restoration of original design parameters, design quality to the levees.
They weren't necessarily designed back then. It was
Yeah.
Louis Galley would just build the levee and it would be what it was.
Yeah.
It was a 2 to 1 slope, he didn't build it vertical. He wasn't that good.
Yeah. It was pointed out to me in the break time, particularly where I think it's SJ 30, I believe SJ 40, that this levee is quite narrow and quite steep vertically, kind of to your point, and that was another location that was pointed out to me as having those characteristics. And it also happens to be at a location where the channel's bottlenecking pretty tight. So that's probably going a long way to explaining why, you know, the risk curves were a lot steeper for these levees than some of these over here. Other comments, and then I'm going to be transitioning back to John. I will also add one other thing. On the table when you came in, there was another big, thick document, which was the existing and needed technical studies report. That's a previous report that ESA wrote, again, at the behest of the RCD, which was kind of summarizing all of the technical work that's been done on Paradise Cut, dating back now more than 10 years in a lot of cases. And also trying to identify what the additional needs for more analysis are. But again, your comments are very welcome on that in terms of identifying what those additional needs are. So is there geotechnical study that should be done on some certain levee reach? There was a suggestion earlier about maybe doing some soundings in bathymetry, and I know a lot of that occurs already, but maybe there's some locations where we want to do that in more detail or more frequently or something like that. Anything of that nature would be really, really valuable to hear about. Okay, I don't see any other hands, and so for time, I think we'll go over to John, and he'll talk for a few more minutes, and of course, I'm around and available afterward if folks have additional questions for me. But again, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you. I'm a little disappointed in everybody because when we were preparing for this, I told them that, well, there are going to be people that are nasty and yelling, and just direct that to me, and nobody's yelling. So come on, wake up. Okay, out of order earlier, I talked about habitat restoration issues, so let me just do it again real quickly. You know, various people have different thoughts on, you know, the degree to which we should have habitat and restoration efforts, and I understand that, but we're trying to design a project that everybody likes, right? Isn't that the easiest way to get something done? And it's not that we're anti-habitat, it's just that our first impression on things, right, is we got to make sure the levee's strong, and so when water comes down, it doesn't flood, and we'd like to be able to divert water from our channels. Those are the first two things that come to us. But there's nobody here that says things like, oh, we don't want to do any habitat, we hate this stuff. Of course we want to do habitat. So there are all sorts of possibilities, and I've written down a lot of them, and I've put that in a lot of the memos we've sent to people to explain things, and it really makes the whole area better. And as I said before, there's numerous things we can do. There we go. And let's just start. The hyacinth Egeria. If you're on Middle River, you know that there's a Egeria and hyacinth problem. If you're in the rest of the Delta, you know there's a hyacinth problem. When you dredge 25 miles of channel and you go down, I don't know, 4-8 feet, all of the Egeria is taken out, right? And the hyacinth will be taken out too. That's not a long-term solution, but that really helps everybody immediately. That's a habitat issue. You've got more water in the channel, you've got more oxygen in the channel, and the deeper the channel, the less sunlight goes through and the less the Egeria will grow. So these are all multi-benefit things that we're doing, even though they may not have been planned that way. Tom Paine Slough. Now, I'm not offering people's property to do things, but when you go upstream of Tom Paine Slough, the part that we use, right, that we divert from, there's still the remnants of the channel. There's a little pond in one place, little things there. Let's talk to people that make habitat and say, can we do something like that? Talk to the landowner, say, is that okay with you? Can we do those things? That's a very good possibility for other types of habitat. Now, there's an island there, which I won't mention. I've talked to one landowner already and says, okay, if I talk to the public about your island might be a dredge spoil site and then turned into a habitat, which whatever kind they want. They said, sure, it's a question, you know, somebody has to buy it from us, but I haven't talked to the other. So, but we have a big island there that when we dredge, we can put the dredge spoils there to the water to decant out. We can take the soil, we can leave it there, and then we can turn that into anything we want, right? If they say, we would like riparian brush rabbit habitat, and we'll build up a mound there so when the high floods come, they have a place to go. Fine, that doesn't hurt anybody. Maybe it's just making channels through that so water flows, and we have shallow water habitat for fish. Paradise Cut. Well, we're going to route a lot of water down Paradise Cut. So we have to decide with other people, what's the channel going to look like? Are we going to have net flows in it by doing something? Are we going to have habitat here and not there? Are we going to deepen this? Are we going to put a mound here to redirect stuff? Are we going to have high areas for the brush rabbit? What are we going to do? But that's a huge, long channel that we can do all sorts of things more than just letting it go to waste right now It's some level of habitat right now, right? But every tree and bush in Paradise Cut is interfering with flow down that channel. So we have to do it we have to construct it in a way that helps both needs. Grantline Canal. The reason that's on there is because, as you know, between Fabian Bell and Grantline Canal, there's those little channel islands, right? Well, those aren't protected. So silt could accumulate in one, high flows might flush one away. We can talk to the fishery people, we can talk to the, whatever environmentalists, we can say, okay, what do you want? Shouldn't we protect those rather than having them being destroyed slowly over high flow times? That's a good idea. Old River, Middle River, they both have numerous channel islands, right? Some people use their channel island, other people told me, it's a waste, the only thing I do with that channel island is shoo off squatters and things, Those islands can be protected, they can be constructed into what we want to make it good, whether it's fish, whether it's birds, whether it's, land animals, whatever you want, but those are huge opportunities. Salmon Slough, I mentioned that. Salmon Slough's a mess. You guys been to Salmon Slough recently? It's a mess. Chris, isn't that your fault? Aren't you?
Yeah, that's my fault.
Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
absolutely. I'll take that.
Salmon Slough should be returned to a functioning channel of the South Delta, right? Get water flowing through it. We might be able to improve the water quality in the east end of Grantline by just having some simple structure that at low flows, tide comes in this way and then it'll flow out that way rather than the end of the channel going like this in the tides and the salts collect and the water quality gets worse. All sorts of opportunities. That's basically it. There's all sorts of things. And so we've got the map back there. I've come up with these things over the years.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So you're talking about what appears to be development of some of these waterside habitat, which I'm interested to hear what the department is saying with regards to bringing fish closer to the pumps. If we're talking about shaded riverine aquatic, which we know is a habitat type that we're grossly under, mitigated for, and we start, let's say for instance, Fabian Track along Fabian Bell, we flatten the slope, we bench it, we put trees down there. Now we have shade for fish. We're bringing all these fish. The pumps are going to pull them. What discussions have you had with the department, and for that matter, the feds, as to us bringing more fish into the lower South Delta?
Well, Chris, it's not your job to bring up embarrassing questions while I'm making it.
I didn't yell at you though, did I?
It's my job.
I haven't yelled at you yet.
It's my job to embarrass the people that may not want fish in the channels.
Okay.
And so that is exactly right. Over the years, from CalFed to now, we've directly confronted fishery people and say, do you want fish in the South Delta channels? Because if you don't want fish, then maybe we don't have to mitigate if we do projects. But if you want fish, tell us. And they say, well, we're not sure. The reason they're not sure is, number one, when you have export pumps, it takes the flow the wrong way in most channels, and it goes over there, and they salvage a lot of fish. So they're not sure they want any fish in there. Number two, there's a tension between the people that want to protect the last 7 Delta smelt that are alive and the salmon runs that are going to be gone in 10 years anyway. Because whether you have flow through the South Delta or not from the San Joaquin, both ways. So that's the issue. Now it's not me, I'm the decision maker, but I've tried to put that to the powers to be in the fishery agencies and say, you decide, because I'm offering you substantial habitat benefit for aquatic and other species, but aquatic habitat. Don't you want fish in the South Delta? Now I'll tell you, a biologist for the Corps of Engineers on a recent tour, when I put that to him, he said, well, I don't know if we want fish. And so I was a little depressed at that, but he's not a decision maker. So we want to make sure that we have a nice area for eternity, right? And we want to make sure that we have a nice project that people give us permits for. It's just not shallow, let's just do it because it looks good. This is good stuff that helps everybody. So anyway, that was a good question. I wish you hadn't asked it. Okay, what's the future? Well, the future is moving forward, right? We've got this good idea. We had an old project, put a new part into it. We're moving forward, see what we can get. Now, again, I keep complimenting DWR, which is really difficult for me to do. But DWR is, bucking up and giving giving San Jafka $3 million soon. And we hope there's another $10 million coming, so that's good. So we've got some seed money here to keep things going. South Delta expends a little bit as we go all the time. we can't, fund the project, but we're going to keep going. Now, the reclamation districts, we're not asking for money from you guys. We're asking for your participation. South Delta, in its budget this fiscal year, is that right? Allocated money to pay for engineer time for the advisory committee up to a certain amount. So we're trying to lessen the expense on the rec districts by saying, okay, when you send your rep, a professional rep, South Delta can reimburse you for that time so there's not a big hit on you. But we need your participation, and who knows, in the future we may be asking everybody for money too, but that's not the goal right now. So this is where we're going. Sajafka's already, to their great benefit, gotten the Corps of Engineers to include this project within their upcoming feasibility study for the area, right? Glenn, am I lying here?
No, that is correct. It is being considered right now in discussion.
Okay, well, you should be happy about that.
I am.
Okay. Anyway, so the process is moving forward. We're not ready for permits yet, but the process is moving forward. And a number of people, South Delta, we're trying to find that extra money, that big money, so we can get moving once we've got some more preliminary stuff done. A lot of stuff to do, correct? A lot. So you guys don't have to call me tomorrow. You guys don't have to send a letter to, a week from now, but you have to stay interested so that when stuff comes up, stuff comes out, you guys say, great, or you guys say, well, you're an idiot. The problem's not there, it's over here. That's why we have that map there. That's why we have the comment cards. You tell us, right? Because I can drive a levee, but I don't, I can't tell the difference between a rock and a bird. So it's up to somebody who's an expert to be able to tell us where the problems are so we can address those. But we're trying to address all of the rec district problems, right? If I get these huge amounts of dirt that we can trade for rock, and you guys have got long-term plans, and we're getting permits to do things with lots of habitat, right? Let's make sure everything's okay. They're telling us that we're going to have these huge rise in flood and in an ocean stage coming up, but I don't know if that's true or not, or to what degree it's true. But you guys have to have plans, right? Because when we have high flows, they come and looking at the trustees and the engineers and say, Nudek, you're an idiot. No, sorry, that's what Dante says. Can't help that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Again, Dominic, Reclamation District 1007, and the Department of Water Resources has a special projects application in the Delta Levees program, and we've submitted our 5-year plan, and we've hinted that we're going to be submitting an application. So something that all of people in the room could help us. There's all kinds of boxes when we apply for stuff, which includes all of those habitat restorations, but we would have a better chance of getting some funding if with some financial assistance or some support, all that type of stuff. So 1007 is active in the program, and we anticipate submitting something. So maybe we could get a test project or something going if there's strong support from many of the people in this room here. So thank you.
That's an excellent idea. Just make sure you yell at me or Glenn, and when the time gets close to who needs to do what, let's do it.
Any amount that you're going to help us pay for it.
You got it. You got it.
Okay, thank you.
I look poor, but I'm filthy rich. I think that was it. I was going to say something else. That's about it. I'd like to turn it back over to Petrea to close things up here. Thank you, everybody. You can always call us, right? Just yell at me. And I'm very disappointed that Nat Paquetti here, and Moosey was going to be nasty, and he just over there asked one nice question. So anyway, we're here to take the arrows because we need to make sure you're happy before we can get anything done. Petrea.
You still have AOL?
I don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. We really appreciate your time. I did want Chris Elias. Could you raise your hand in the back? He's the executive director of Sajafka, and he'll be taking on the project from now on. Wanted to say big thank you to Phil Balmet from the San Joaquin County RCD, and Sarah Puckett, where are you, with American Rivers over there. They've been part of the planning team for this second phase, and now we'll be turning it over to Sajafka for phase 3. As you can see from this slide, call John if you have questions. He is your contact person. Obviously, Sajafka will be conducting outreach in the future, but for now, in this transition phase between the RCD and Sajafka, please feel free to talk to John if you have questions or further comments.